I don't use live bait unless I have to.
But there are times when live bait is simply going to be a better option.
And plastics aren't 100% no matter what anybody says.
My approach these days is artificial first and foremost, almost all the time.
It's more efficient, it's faster, you can fish quickly.
You know, live bait can be more tedious, it can be more monotonous.
And I will use live bait as a last result.
Strategically, I start with plastics all the time first. That's changed. I used to start with live bait all the time first and then try plastics. Now it's like I've had so much success with plastics, I know how to fish them, that I'll try them first because it's a lot less hassle than going buying live bait. I don't have to try to keep minnows alive or night crawlers alive or any of that stuff. Only if I'm failing on plastics, then I will try to see if live bait is the #1 alternative. And yes, at times it still can be, especially on the natural clear water lakes. But there are other times where if you give plastics a really good shot, they'll outshine live bait in many, many instances. So,
I use artificials to call in fish and catch them as much as I can. It's more efficient, it's faster, you can fish quickly, but live bait definitely has a time and a place. And so often I find myself using artificials to draw in fish when I'm ice fishing from the edges. And then, boom, there goes a rattle reel. Boom, a bobber drops. Boom, there's the dead stick. It's such a consistent deal that, to me, you almost need to have one, and one without the other, you're missing out.
Well, I think when the fish are, you know, when you get on a bite where you're catching fish on a artificial, where it's a, you know, whether it's a rip and wrap or whether it's a, you know, a jig in a plastic or something, and you're getting bit, you don't really worry about the live bait so much. Do we all carry live bait with us? Yeah. When people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't bring live bait with me," I'm always a little suspect of that. Put it in your pocket. If you're bringing Eurolarva or Waxies with you, throw it in your pocket. But you know, don't tell me you don't have it, because there's times when all of a sudden that fish will come up and they'll bump it, but they won't eat it. And then you turn out, you took the plastic off, you drop a Waxie or a couple Eurolarva down, and you put it. It's the smell. I remember I learned something from Gens, Dave Gens, a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, is you squeeze the, like if you put 3 Eurolarva on a hook, you squeeze it so it kind of oozes out. I know it's kind of gross, but the thing is, it gives it that scent, where with the plastic it wasn't working, but all of a sudden they've got something that they're more attracted to. And I think having live bait, even sometimes a small minnow, and you know the interesting thing about crappies in the winter is they really aren't eating minnows in the winter. They're eating grubs and bloodworms and stuff like that. But there's times when you need to change it up. And I'm not going to say a person's a fool, but sometimes you got to think beyond the box, bring a little bit of live bait with you, because if you get caught up in not catching fish, it might be the thing that turns the trick for you.
Well, personally, I'm going to probably be fishing with live bait most of the time. I'm really a live bait junkie. You know, Eurolarva, to be specific, or spikes as they're called if they're all white. It works well. It's alive, it's natural, it has flavor.
There's a time to put a minnow down and let it soak. That's why I have dead sticks. There's a time to jig and run and gun. I always have maggots, waxies, and I have plastics that work. I designed, things like the skeleton minnow. Skeleton minnow plastic probably accounted for 70% of my panfish catch last winter. And you can ask any of my clients, they were there, and they were stubborn. But once in a while I'll put a maggot on it, but I don't most of the time. So that's a different deal. In finesse situations when you're dealing with plastics, but I always have bait. You know, when you're out in the middle of the lake, you can't buy bait. You got to bring it with.
That's where the set lines will really tell you a lot, where if you're getting a lot of false tip-ups or bobber lines where you come up and the minnow's skinned or kind of, you know, just mowed a little bit, that tells you to really slow your roll down, really slow it down, and really go to that live bait presentation. And that says shorten up your hook, you know, use a number 8 instead of a number 6. You maybe use a little bit lighter line. Maybe just let your sinker on the bottom and let your minnow just sit and flop around in the mud or sand. That's basically, I let my set lines do the talk. I mean, you can tell with the jig spoon, you get a bunch of fouls and they leave, fouls and leave. But I always go by my set lines and looking at the minnows that come off them.
I don't use live bait unless I have to. And so I start out using artificials and soft plastics a lot, and I fish pretty aggressively. I want to find the fish. And I feel like the artificials and the soft plastics enable me to fish through more water faster, fish a little bit more aggressively. Maybe I've got a little bit bigger, louder profile that pulls fish into me where the fish can find me. And so I typically have a tendency to fish with artificials / soft plastics. And if that isn't working, then I'll switch up to live bait. But you know, live bait can be more tedious, can be more monotonous, you know, especially if you're using, like, say, a tail hook shiner. You know, it's not like you can fish a lot of water with that. And so if you're gonna plant down in one spot and let that minnow wiggle around, the artificials and the more aggressive presentations kind of tell you where to do that, in the sense that you can sample a lot of water, find the fish with the other stuff, and if you find the fish and say you catch the easy fish and then you know, you wear out your welcome, or you get, at least get it just enough where you know that there's fish there, then you can always plant down and spend more time with the live bait. And so it's kind of a 1-2 punch in my mind.
My approach these days is artificial first and foremost, almost all the time. I strategically am going after more aggressive fish more often than not, and I'm not a very patient fisherman. It's also what I think has made me a good fisherman and has allowed me some longevity inside this industry, is that I'm not willing to throw up a white flag. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to keep moving and pushing till I can find fish that are willing to bite, instead of finding myself camping down. Now granted, there's times, especially ice fishing, where weather is such, or maybe it's a weekend event with family where we're going to camp out in a hard house, and then I'm going to have to figure out ways to get those fish to bite. And on a set line, put a minnow down, it's pretty hard to beat. But for the most part, if I'm going out fishing with buddies, it's plastics first, and I will use live bait as a last result.
If I'm fishing a school of fish that I know is, you know, really aggressive, I will often always just fish maybe a jig and wrap or a spoon, or just no live bait, aggressive fish. They're flying up to hit it, or a blade bait, brr, brr, you're moving fast and I'm covering water. Now, if I'm fishing an area where I really want to focus maybe on a point or a key piece of structure or funnel where fish cruise by, then I will maybe use my artificial baits, but also add down, you know, live bait, big suckers or dead bait, you know, just to increase your odds of catching fish.
The nice thing about artificials is you can fish fast, you can cover water, you can trigger strikes, but there are times when live bait is simply going to be a better option. But on the flip side, and a lot of live bait fishermen struggle with, is that there's times when artificials will make you a more effective fisherman because it allows you to fish faster and cover water. So in terms of live bait, when the situation calls for it, go with live bait. In a situation that you can get away with artificials, and there's more times when you get away with it than there's not, I'd say go to artificials.
Joel Nelson, without a doubt, the finest.
Exactly, I would just say exactly. That'll be the running gag.